Now that the August 2025 FAQ has had some time to settle, I thought it was time to take a look at some of the biggest changes that came with it. More specifically, I really wanted to dive into the 5-second edition bespoke warbands, that were given some love and go over whether or not these changes were enough. Let's not forget that RIVERBLADES, TWISTWEALD, Claws of KARANAK, PYREGHEISTS and the TERATIC cohort were largely unplayed prior to this FAQ, and that was mostly down to them being, well, terrible. By the end of this video, you should have an idea of where they are right now and whether or not these are now truly worth your time and your money. But without further ado, let's dive right in. Idrillin RIVERBLADES. The RIVERBLADES were an unfortunate release despite the fact that they brought some interesting profiles, cool models and some unique ability design. Their reaction, Lethal Gaia, their quad, Boiling Wrath and their double RIVERBLADES in particular stood out as big winners from a unique design perspective, whereas their triple Release the River gave Order access to Wa, something they haven't had access to since the Cities of Sigma overhaul. Despite these strengths, RIVERBLADES came with an unreasonably high price tag on their heroes and on their mid-range, and their abilities, whilst interesting, ultimately weren't enough to carry the warband to any kind of success. Thankfully, the FAQ brought a bunch of changes that directly and indirectly helped the RIVERBLADES in the emerging meta. Firstly, we have points changes. All 3 of their hero options got a reduction in points, and this immediately makes them more takeable. They were always borderline good, but they were also expensive and made of paper. With these reductions, they are still made of paper, but it hurts just a little bit less. Their mid-range, the Crest Dancers, also got some breaks, going from 115 down to 100 points. Where the Seneschal changes have functionally reduced the lead attacks on RIVERBLADES, the Crest Dancer changes have opened up their mid-range dramatically. 100 points for Wounds 10 Toughness 4 may sound squishy, but with Movement 5 base, 6 with RIVERBLADES, more on that in a little bit, 7 with their battle trait, and heck 8 if you plan it correctly with said trait, Crest Dancers are devilishly fast and come with range 2 and range 3 on their weapons, making them deceptively hard to kill. Throw in strength 4 and decent offensive profiles and you are good to go. Now their chaff hasn't been touched, but that's fine because their chaff was always fine, so overall the point reductions have been a massive success. But of course that wasn't the only change, because counter also got nerfed. And whilst I'm not going to go into all the ramifications of counter here, this change is still a buff to RIVERBLADES as they won't be killing themselves when they attack, which ultimately means this warband is going to attack more freely. Of course, this warband isn't known for attacking things in melee, but it's nice to know that when they do, they aren't hindering their longevity anywhere near as much. Finally, we have the start of the show when it comes to their changes, RIVERBLADES. This double has went from pretty darn good to outstanding. All they did was double the damage output, and that's all they needed to do to define the RIVERBLADES' unique playstyle. RIVERBLADES lets you throw a dagger after every action. This dagger hits on a 2+ and does 2 damage and has an 8-inch range. Considering you are throwing 2 daggers per activation, you are likely going to see 4 flat damage being thrown out every time you burn a double. This drastically increases the damage output of this warband, and everybody can do it. And because of the 8-inch range, they can do it without actually having to get into combat at all. RIVERBLADES effectively bullies everything from chaff to mid-range to medium-sized beaters like Vexmore or Deathbringer just by staying away and throwing knives. Not only that, if their harder hitters are doing it like their Seneschals, then the thing that they are hitting and then daggering are not going to have a good time at all. What this change has done is effectively weaponize movement in Warcry. The fastest elves in the game now deal damage just by utilizing their incredible speed, and it's a real pain to deal with. And of course their point reductions let them dabble in their mid-range more, maybe take multiple leaders, and of course the faction just takes allies very well. Overall, RIVERBLADES have went from the depths of D tier and comfortably end up in B tier with the added award of Rising Star. Of all the warbands I am going to talk about today, RIVERBLADES have the highest chance of breaking through and being a real menace in the competitive scene. TWISTWEALD. TWISTWEALD had a lot of problems at launch. Most of their abilities were a little bit underwhelming, their stats were also underwhelming, and their points were way too high for the amount of underwhelm that was on display, and really the only redeeming feature of this warband was their leader, the Swarm Sage, and ultimately even that last never saw any real play. In short, the TWISTWEALD just weren't good. Their playstyle was very blend-centric with a focus on killing hordes in mid-range more than anything else, and that's all well and good, but it also meant they weren't playing into the meta very well, as the meta of the time was getting more smashy, more elite. And when you consider TWISTWEALD are rocking wound 10 and wound 12 across the board, with points well above 100, well, they were never going to do well. Not only that, their core ability lineup had little in the way of support. No nets, no mobility tricks, just low raw damage. But thankfully TWISTWEALD did get some love in this FAQ, and that love translates directly to points changes. Almost everything in the warband has been reduced by 5 points, although their leader, the Swarm Sage, and their Dryads have went down a whopping 10. These changes aren't as substantial as other warband changes, but they are still definitely welcome. Over a whole warband, you are saving anywhere from 30 to 70 points, letting you bless your guys more freely, add in allies more effectively, and generally do more in the list building before you start to lose out on model count. Like with RIVERBLADES, TWISTWEALD also benefit greatly from the changes to counter. Not only do they have their own form of counter with mycelial ravaging, but they also have some pretty hefty attack values. Almost everything in TWISTWEALD is rocking 4 attacks, which meant their low wound totals were being devastated by counter. Not anymore. Then you get to factor in the changes to Eruption of Thorns. This used to do half ability dice value damage on a 4+ to enemies within a 1-inch AoE. This was a small bubble doing reasonable damage but not hitting reliably. Now Eruption of Thorns does all of that, just minus the 4+ part. It just does the flat damage. For me, this change has revitalized the TWISTWEALD. It lets them reliably pop off, do risky bombing runs, and reliably kill enemies left on low wounds. It's almost always better than Onslaught. It bypasses all kinds of reactions, namely those that happen on death, and when combined with their points changes and the counter changes, well, TWISTWEALD have a bit of a bite now. Of course, they are still very squishy and operate with their 12 wounds and have 8-man warbands for the most part, although they can go to 9, meaning they require a lot of finesse and don't play well into smashier, tankier teams. That being said, they could be a hard roadblock to things like Horde meta. The potential of an emergent elf meta plays into their style perfectly as well, and the slow return of mid-range is also up their alley. Basically, TWISTWEALD are better and arguably even good. They went from a D to a solid C, with the potential, based on how the game evolves, to maybe even go as high as a low B. They are the definition of a specialist warband in Warcry, and there's definitely a place for them now. The Claws of KARANAK. The Claws of KARANAK. My lord, I have done a video recently going over these guys and why they were so bad. Basically, they were way too expensive, had limited damage output and poor abilities, basically left these guys languishing at the bottom of tier lists. But Games Workshop graced Korn's favourite hunters with some pretty hefty buffs. We are talking 20 points off the pack lord, taking him from a decent leader to a serious ally contender. Brutalizers went down 10 points, the Hound of Wrath went down to 150 points, heck, their Chaff even dropped 15 points and are now 75 points a pop. These are not insignificant changes. In fact, these are so substantial that if you just took a 1 box of Claws of KARANAK, you have enough points left over that you can take a second Hound of Wrath, which is awesome and incidentally isn't a bad list. These points changes help Claws of KARANAK build bigger warbands and more importantly take better allies. Claws of KARANAK can stack some killer allies into their lists and still maintain their 8-man status. And not only that, but every model in this warband at their new points level are great. Pack loads for 185 for the 5525 profile is an absolute blender. Brutalizers at 110 for a 4424, 15 wounds are also great. Their blood whelps 3413 or 2424 on a 3-inch flail or a 2-inch spear with 12 wounds and movement 5 and only 75 points. Absolutely outstanding. Even the previously unused Hound of Wrath at 150 points is pure perfection. This guy is a well-priced glass cannon who you kind of want to take at least one of, if not two. And not to beat a dead horse here, but they've also been buffed by counter like everything else up until this point. All of their hard hitters have 4 or 5 attacks and they were fairly expensive, so they took a lot of counter damage and it never felt great, but now they don't take that damage and they are a lot cheaper, so they can be a lot more aggressive and really bully mid-range and hordes. Then you factor in their ability change. Pack Hunters has had its rune mark restriction lifted, meaning anybody can use it. They do still need to target an agile fighter, however. This opens up closer KARANAK in all kinds of fun ways. Mostly it means that your brutalizers and your pack lords can pull off some pretty sick plays. Obvious ones are activating your pack lord, swinging 10 times, using pack hunters to activate Hound of Wrath, have him attack 10 times, and then blend through all kinds of anything. You can even use it to activate some chaff and poke through a couple of wounds if you fail to land the kill. It also lets you use your big hitters to kill something like a treasure carrier, then activate your chaff to pick it up on the cheap. Pack Hunters has taken another step to becoming just inspiring presence, but cheaper, and that's great. There's a lot of nuance to this ability, and players who dedicate themselves to closer KARANAK will show their mastery by how effectively they can use this double going forward. And finally, closer KARANAK are just fast, right? So on paper they have all the same weaknesses as the TWISTWEALD, right? They focus heavily on blending through warbands that are a little bit softer than they are. This is a problem when they fight into bigger things. Unlike TWISTWEALD, however, closer KARANAK are innately fast. Their guys are all movement 5 base, with the Hound of Wrath going to a meaty movement 8. This means they can dance around the board and not get into conflicts with things that they don't want to fight. And of course it also means that they can use their movement to chase down the things that they actually do want to fight. Throw in hit and run enablers like Blood for the Blood God, and this warband has loads of tempo that can be quite difficult for your opponent to deal with, especially now that they are cheaper and they have bigger warbands with better allies. Overall, I think the closer KARANAK are in a great place, but more could still be done to make them even better. Closer KARANAK do have some strong abilities, namely Pack Hunters and Blood for the Blood God, but for the most part they are lacking in this area. Not only that, their reaction is poor and their battle trait is arguably the worst battle trait in the entire game. But all of that being said, this is a great bump to their playability. With the right allies, I think closer KARANAK could go all the way. Because of that, closer KARANAK go from D tier to somewhere in B tier, which is not something I think anyone was expecting when they saw this FAQ come out. PYREGHEISTS. Onto some death now, and we have PYREGHEISTS. These guys have always struggled. Like with many of the warbands in this video, they were simply too expensive. Not only that, they also suffered the same fate as the TWISTWEALD in that they were pretty darn slow and were rocking 10 to 12 wounds a model, whilst also being pretty darn expensive, don't forget that part. Throw in their gimmick, which was a pain to get working due to how clunky and resource intensive pyre tokens were, and you had a warband that never really found its footing. Heck, they didn't even have a reaction, the only warband in the game to ever suffer that fate. Well, all of that has come to an end as PYREGHEISTS have finally reached a state of actual playability. Everything bar their deacons, who were already pretty darn good, went down 5 to 15 points. Which means 3 things: they can take more stuff, they can take better stuff, or they can just do both of those things at the same time. Throw in more access to allies and blessings, and PYREGHEISTS can finally interact with Warcry's list building systems in a meaningful way. Put it this way, your Balefire Guard were cut by a whopping 15 points. This lets you take Balefire Guard and bless them with +4 wounds, and now you have a tanky Balefire Guard who cost just as much as he did prior to the change, only now he is much harder to kill. Now, PYREGHEISTS never really cared about being countered despite their low wounds. The most commonly taken PYREGHEISTS typically lingered around about the 3 attack mark, so counter just never really came up as a significant negative. That being said, the change has still helped, because a lot of their ranged 1 units actually had 4 attacks, and now they can take them without any repercussions, and there's benefits beyond just the counter changes that make these range 1 4 attack guys much more viable. Of course, I am talking about the biggest change to PYREGHEISTS, and that is the introduction of Immolation. Immolation is the PYREGHEIST reaction, and it's pretty darn swanky. Basically, if you die to a melee attack, you make a pyre token. Since tokens only have a 1-inch range of damage, you really want some of your guys closer to your opponent. For the record, you ideally want your guys in base contact if you intend to immolate them. So when they die, you drop a token and you have a good time. Whilst you're waiting to die, you have the benefits of a higher attack output, letting you deal more damage. It all plays into itself very nicely. Just remember to use proper sequencing and timing so you don't attack and then die before you can react. Since Immolation is generating more tokens, it means your trait is also triggering more often, meaning you have more wild dice, which gives you more control over the pace of the game and more access to your abilities. Your guys dying is never ideal, but getting value on death is a solid reprieve. Like most warbands here, PYREGHEISTS will struggle into elites as they don't have the raw damage output to kill them, but into everything else they should perform pretty darn well. Unfortunately, despite these buffs, PYREGHEISTS are still suffering a little bit due to pyre tokens as a whole being too clunky. Ideally, this mechanic will get an overhaul at some point, either increasing the range of the token or letting you place the token with less restrictions. Ideally both. If that happens, I think PYREGHEISTS will become a truly complete warband that is definitely worth playing and will see play as a result. But all of that aside, where do PYREGHEISTS stand in the current state of things? Like with all the rest, they settled in D tier before the update. After the update, I think they climb into the upper half of C. If their tokens are ever given some love, then I can see Pyres going into B. For now though, they are comfortably in that cozy C tier. TERATIC Cohort. I have had a soft spot in my heart for TERATIC Cohort since their release. Their battle trait was always an absolute blast, and they had some really fun abilities like Archery Severing Bite, Savagery Unbound, and Bestial Leap that gives them a funky playstyle that just clicked with me, not to mention their Wild Dice gimmick and their Wild Dice generator, Eyes of Kakatros. Sadly, TERATIC Cohort have never been all that good, and we're talking maybe bottom of C tier, like barely escaping the depths of D, barely on a good day. That being said though, someone at Games Workshop really likes TERATIC Cohort because they got a lot of love in the FAQ, more so than most of the warbands I have talked about here. As per, we're going to start with point changes, and these guys got the most by far. We are talking minus 30 on their leader, minus 20 on their Skellybobs, and minus 10 on their beasts. Both of them. I mean, you are saving about 125 points on a 1-box. The list I was running prior to this update saved even more. This literally lets you add a whole extra model to your warband, almost 2. Which means you are looking at 8 to 9 man warbands with models that are rocking some killer stats. The Centauri at 205 points with 5424, movement 7, range 3 is insane value as a leader, as a 2-of, and as a new up-and-coming death ally. Cycloptians at 125 points, rocking wounds 18, strength 5, and decent damage. Awesome. Their dogs at 70 points with toughness 4, wounds 10, 3, 4, 2, 4. These are great profiles at a very respectable price point. Again, none of this factors in their abilities. TERATIC Cohort have a suite of solid abilities ranging from attack buffs to free movement. Your guys are getting into combat and they are hitting pretty damn hard. Then you consider the changes to Eyes of Kakatros, and now you can use this as many times as you want in a single turn. Do this early and you control the initiative phase. You get more abilities per turn and you can power your gimmick easier. Heck, with the changes to counter, their own reaction becomes even more appealing, especially with their newly found stash of wild dice. TERATIC Cohort excel at killing mid-range and hordes like everybody else here today, but they do it without sacrificing their ability to deal with elites. TERATIC Cohort are fast, their trait allows them to deploy more freely, letting them pressure weak warbands from turn 1. They have movement for days, so they can apply even more pressure. A whole group can alpha strike and there's nothing your opponent can really do about it. But when the big boys come knocking, they can use those same traits and abilities to stay away from them. Play cagey, divide and conquer, gang up on one guy and beat him to death. There's always been a lot to TERATIC Cohort, but the cost you are paying for that was always too high. Now they've been freed from that burden and they feel amazing to play. Are they top tier? No. Are they A tier? Probably not. But they went from the dregs of D or C tier to somewhere into the B tier for sure. They are one of my favourite warbands to play now, and all it took was a couple of points changes and a little bit of quality of life. I absolutely love the TERATIC Cohort. And that's the end of this video. This was a lot of fun to make. I love talking about bespokes in particular, and when I'm actively building up warbands for TERATIC Cohort, PYREGHEISTS and TWISTWEALD, well, you just know that all these warbands are in better shape. These really were some of the worst warbands in Warcry. None of them retain that status. More warbands have joined that fat mid-tier that Warcry loves to cultivate, and that makes me a happy player. Let me know in the comments down below what you think of these 5 warbands and if they've piqued your interest at all. And whilst you're down there, be sure to hit that subscribe button. Until next time, lads, ladies, and everybody in between and beyond, ta-ra. Groovy. Welcome to the post-toast credits. A massive shout out to all of my patrons and members, but an extra big shout out to my algorithmic demon slayers, Andy Morris, blah blah blah, Brioche, the Head Knight of Paint, Heinz D, Lord Fireaxe, Maps, Sable Saver, Steve Bean, the Houston Toad, and Velas. Thank you all for continuing to support this shit show of a channel, and I'll catch you all next time.